Pope Francis, renowned for his progressive views and compassionate leadership since becoming the head of the Catholic Church in 2013, has recently sparked discussions across religious communities with his revolutionary insights on Jesus' life and teachings. In a series of impactful sermons and speeches, he shared revelations about the true nature of Jesus' death that have left even devout believers questioning long-held beliefs. This article dives into Pope Francis's transformative perspectives, his calls for empathy and inclusivity, and the controversies stirred by his interpretation of Christianity in the modern world. Explore his teachings, how they challenge traditional Catholic doctrine, and their implications for faith and society, that we are followers of Jesus Christ. And his life, humanly speaking, ended in failure, the failure of the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? Finished. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Pope Francis has just dropped a bombshell shaking the foundations of Christian belief as we've known it for years. Pope Francis, the 266th and current Pope of the Catholic Church, has been turning heads since his overseeing tenure began in 2013. Known for his impactful views on Christianity and being a preacher of compassion and love, he's been a great breath of fresh air in the often traditional Vatican. But his most recent revelation has left even the most devout followers completely shocked. In a series of recent speeches and sermons, Pope Francis has been talking about what he calls the true nature of Jesus' death. And let me tell you, it's not what we've been told. In this video, we address this recent revelation and what the Pope has to share to the whole world. Pope Francis addressed people on Easter to share his feelings and opinions on specific topics. As you know, Easter Sunday is a special day for Christians because they believe it's when Jesus came back to life after dying on the cross. While addressing them, Pope Francis talked about how God is always with us, but he also said some surprising things about Jesus. What's not surprising is that this wasn't the first time he said something that didn't quite sit well with the public. He is quite notorious for often saying things that make traditional Catholics uncomfortable. But this time, even his supporters, Orthodox Catholics and critics, were taken aback by what he said. He boldly made some revelations about Jesus' death that no one knew about or had ever heard before. It made many people question what they've always believed about Jesus. Before we get into all of that, first, we need to look at how Pope Francis leads the Catholic Church, and I must tell you that he leads it in a very unusual way. From growing up in Buenos Aires to becoming a world-renowned priest, Pope Francis was known for his simple way of life and care for the poor and marginalized. Instead of living in the fancy apostolic palace like previous popes, Pope Francis chose to live in the much simpler Vatican guest house. He also dressed very modestly, showing that he didn't want a lot of wealth and luxury. During his time as Pope, Pope Francis talked about important values like kindness, including everyone, and protecting the environment. He believed that the Church should welcome everyone no matter where they come from or what their situation is. Pope Francis even tried to connect with people from other religions, not just Catholics, to help everyone understand each other better. For a religion that some think of as only for certain people, Pope Francis's way of accepting everyone was controversial to some more traditional Catholics. Pope Francis tried hard to keep the crucial beliefs of the Church while also making changes to fit the modern world better. He cared a lot about helping people who didn't have much and spoke up for them. Pope Francis once said that some of the happiest people are those who don't have much. But his new ways of looking at things also caused some arguments about whether the Church should stick to its old beliefs or change to fit in with the world today. While many people liked Pope Francis's changes to the Catholic Church, not everyone was happy with his new ideas about the Bible and Jesus. Some people committed to the old Catholic beliefs didn't like the changes, but it seems like some of the arguments have calmed down after his latest talk about Jesus. Before we talk about the teachings that seem to calm things down in the Catholic Church, let's understand why there's been some controversy around Pope Francis, his teachings, and his way of leading. Trying to keep the important beliefs of the Catholic Church while also making old teachings fit in with modern life has been a big challenge for Pope Francis. Instead of only following the exact words written down, Pope Francis wants Catholics to think deeper about the stories in the Bible. He says these stories have deeper meanings that can teach us valuable things about life today. For example, Pope Francis says the story of how the world was created in the book of Genesis. In the beginning there was darkness, and then there was light. Experience the awe-inspiring tale of creation as told in the book of Genesis is not just about how things began. He thinks it's a powerful story that teaches us about our special connection with God and our responsibility to care for the earth. Looking at the Bible this way makes its teachings more meaningful for our lives now. But not everyone agrees with Pope Francis. Some people, called conservatives, think the Bible should be understood exactly as it's written, without thinking about its deeper meanings. They worry that looking deeper into the Bible's stories might change the fundamental beliefs of the Church. On the other hand, people who support Pope Francis think that understanding the deeper meanings of the Bible's stories can make its teachings even better and more relevant for today's world. Before we proceed, you need to know some of the Pope's most controversial interpretations of the Bible. Some of them will shock you. What are the Pope's most controversial teachings that have actually divided the Catholic Church? The Pope is known for saying things that make people talk. Some of his statements are quite all right in the Christian faith, but some cause big discussions and make people question his faith and, weirdly, whether he'll go to heaven. Recently, the Pope said something specifically for LGBTQ Catholics. It's the first time there's been any talk about blessing same-sex couples. Catholic priests can now bless same-sex couples. Pope Francis formally changed Vatican policy today, which, knowing the common religious aversion to the topic, is a huge deal. Some people even want to remove him from being the Pope because of this. To understand why, let's look at some of the things he said. Some years ago, there were reports that Pope Francis said something strange. He reportedly said that humans could disappear, and God would make new species. This came from an interview in an Italian newspaper with a friend of the Pope, Eugenio Scalfari, who is an atheist. In another interview, Scalfari reminded the Pope about this and asked about what happens to bad people who go to hell. He wondered if their souls would suffer forever. In response, Pope Francis reportedly said that people who feel sorry for what they did and ask God for forgiveness won't be punished. Instead, they'll be forgiven and can be with God. But those who don't feel sorry and can't be forgiven will stop existing, according to the Pope. He doesn't believe in hell. Instead, he thinks that souls who do bad things just disappear. After this interview, the Vatican quickly said that what Scalfari wrote wasn't exactly what the Pope said. They said the words weren't written down right, so we shouldn't consider them exactly what the Pope thinks. Even though the Vatican said this, there was still some arguing about the interview. First, they put it in their newspaper and website, then took it off, and then put it back again before finally taking it off for good. This, of course, caused a lot of confusion. Some people connected what Scalfari wrote to something the Pope wrote in a book called Amoris Laetitia. In that book, the Pope said nobody should be punished forever because that's not what the Bible says. This made some people think that maybe the Pope has different ideas about hell. In another interview in 2015, Pope Francis seemed to say that even though nobody goes to hell forever, people who don't want to be with God might just stop existing after they die. So even though the Vatican said Scalfari got it wrong, there's still some confusion about what the Pope really thinks about hell. That's not all. Pope Francis has also said things that seem different from what the Church has always taught about the world's top problems. In 2013, Pope Francis did another interview where he said the biggest issues in the world right now are young people not having jobs and older people feeling lonely. You wouldn't expect the Pope to say these are the most severe problems. Then he reportedly said that trying to make people become Catholics doesn't make sense and is silly. This goes against what the Bible says about telling everyone about Jesus. Even more surprising, the Pope allegedly said that there is no particular Catholic God, only God. This seems to go against the idea that Catholicism is the only true religion. Many Catholics were confused and upset by what the Pope reportedly said. Maybe the Pope didn't fully believe in some of the major parts of Catholicism. Some people thought perhaps he has a different, more general view of spirituality that isn't strictly Catholic. And if that's true, not many will be surprised. Continuing with his beliefs, the Pope received more criticism in 2016. Now remember, he always says that abortion is very wrong, but his focus on being kind and forgiving has caused arguments. In 2016, during the Special Mercy Year, the Pope said that priests could forgive women who had abortions. Making another dent in his progressive image, the Pope went off script in his weekly address to the faithful gathered on St. Peter's Square to deliver his strongest criticism yet of abortion. Some people liked this idea, but others didn't. Now let's discuss what the Pope thinks about money and how the world works. He didn't hold back when talking about capitalism. He said it's not suitable for poor people. He even said caring too much about money, cars, and phones takes people away from God. He said the world needs to be more fair for everyone, with rich and poor people having more equal lives. These words made people who care about fairness very happy, but some said the Pope was talking too much about socialist ideas. One of his most surprising moves was when he said that he was totally against the death penalty. In 2018, Pope Francis said that the death penalty is always wrong, no matter what. This was a major change for the Catholic Church, which before said it was okay in some situations, but not everyone liked what the Pope said. Many people, both inside and outside the Church, criticized him for it. Some high-ranking Catholic scholars were really unhappy with him. They thought he was going against important Catholic beliefs, so they, along with some priests, wrote a letter saying that the Pope was going against the Church's teachings. This letter was published on April 30th on the website LifeSite News. In the letter, they said that Pope Francis was preaching differently from Catholic teachings about marriage, sex, and forgiveness. They said this was the third time they had to talk about this. First, in 2016, they wrote a letter to top Catholic leaders, saying that the Pope was teaching the wrong things. Then, in 2017, they said the Pope was teaching 7 things that were against Catholic beliefs, but they didn't call it heresy. But in 2018, they said that what the Pope was teaching was definitely heresy. That's not even half of it. They also said that the Pope doesn't feel sorry for his actions. The letter said the bishops should say that the Pope is guilty of heresy and punish him. They said that he should be removed from his position as the leader of the Catholic Church. 19 well-known Catholics signed this letter, including Aidan Nichols, a founder of the Dominican Order, law professor Brian McCall, and scholar Anna Silvas. Within 12 hours, more than 1,500 other people added their names to an online petition supporting what the letter said about the Pope. The letter pointed to things the Pope said, and did that go against what the Catholic Church teaches? They also talked about the Pope saying that divorced and remarried Catholics can take communion, even though the Catholic Church says marriage should last forever. The letter said the Pope was changing important Catholic beliefs about right and wrong. They said he was making people think that what's right and wrong depends on each person instead of having clear rules from the Church. The supporters of the letters didn't just do this for their hands, it got more serious. What do recent supporters of the letter now have to say? Supporters of the letter said they were bravely defending the common Catholic beliefs from changes by Pope Francis that they think are wrong and could confuse people, but critics said it was unfair to attack the Pope's authority. But here's the thing. Pope Francis's ideas aren't new. They're part of a bigger revolution in the Catholic Church that started after the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. During this time, the Church began looking at the Bible in new ways. They used history and culture to understand what the Bible really means. This way of looking at the Bible has led to different, more detailed ideas about what it teaches. But this change has caused a big argument. Even now, some people, called conservatives, are still claiming Pope Francis is changing the Catholic Church's beliefs to fit in with what people think now. They didn't like it when in 2019 there was talk about letting married men become priests in some places. They also didn't like it when Catholic priests were allowed to bless same-sex couples. This argument is really about whether the Church's beliefs should always stay the same, or if they can change as the world changes. Traditionalists, who want to keep things the same, say that Pope Francis is making the Church's beliefs less important by changing them. But Pope Francis's supporters say that the Church's beliefs can change to fit in with what's happening now. They say that this makes the church's beliefs more meaningful for people today. They think that by changing, the church can still be a guide for people even as the world changes. How the Pope looks at the Bible challenges Catholics to live out the essential beliefs of their faith. He says that we should follow Jesus' example of loving everyone and treating them with respect. He wants us to understand the Bible in a way that makes us want to be better people. His teachings tell us to balance following old traditions and living in the modern world. He wants our faith to be something we practice every day, not just something we believe. Even though some people didn't like what the Pope said before, his recent ideas about Jesus surprised everyone, even his critics. So what did the Pope say about Jesus that was so surprising? He didn't just talk about new ways to understand the Bible. He also said we should act with kindness and love, just like Jesus did. He says that Jesus cared a lot about poor and struggling people, and that we should too. During that time, Jesus wasn't some distant figure. He was deeply connected to the struggles of ordinary people. He experienced firsthand the oppression and unfairness under the brutal Roman occupation. He used this perspective to urge Christians to follow his example by reaching out to help and understand those around them, especially those less fortunate. We can see practical examples of this in the shocking revelations made by Pope Francis about the true nature of Jesus Christ on two very noticeable occasions. And the first eye-opening moment happened when the Pope visited a correctional center. Despite just recovering, he went straight to presiding over Mass and washing the feet of 12 young inmates from various backgrounds, nationalities, races, and faiths, including Islam and even 2 women. As he performed this powerful foot-washing ritual, Pope Francis gave a significant sermon. This was the setting for Pope Francis to preside over the Mass of the Lord's Supper on Holy Thursday. The Pope reflected on Jesus washing the feet of his disciples and Judas's betrayal, and he stressed that nothing is beyond forgiveness. He began by explaining that foot washing isn't just an old tradition, but a gesture showing how we are to be with one another, caring for each other. But then the Pope took it to another level entirely. He plainly said it's hard to see so much injustice in the world, with people taking advantage of others, people trapped with no way out, and many broken families. Pope Francis said that if anyone has avoided such hardship, it's not because they're better but because of God's grace. Here's where it gets more interesting though. Looking those inmates in the eye, the Pope stated that everyone can slip, each one of us. And this awareness that we can all slip gives us the dignity of being sinners, and Jesus wants us that way. That's why he tried to wash our feet, to save and serve us. The Pope backed this up by quoting Jesus, saying that if we listened to his lessons, life would be wonderful because we'd rush to help each other instead of taking advantage, like the unwise teacher. Pope Francis preached that helping others and lending a hand comes from a noble heart, and Jesus today wants to teach us this nobility of heart. But he went even further, getting extremely personal and relatable. He said we might think if the Pope knew our inner flaws, but Jesus literally knows everything already and loves us as we are. Then he said something even more kind. He said that Jesus is never frightened by our weaknesses. He already paid for our sins. He only wants to accompany us to take our hand, so life will not be so hard. Basically, the Pope is saying that Jesus isn't shocked by our failures and doesn't judge us. He simply wants to walk beside us, ease our burdens, and love us unconditionally in our imperfect state. Whether religious or not, you must admit these are some of the most uplifting, inclusive teachings about embracing our shared flaws while striving for goodness. Pope Francis enjoys preaching the dignity of our imperfections and Jesus' boundless love for us all, exactly as we are. Those were the most shocking truth that'll last for ages to come. No wonder jaws were left on the floor after the Holy Father dropped such wisdom. As if that wasn't enough, during a recent Mass at the famous St. Peter's Square, Pope Francis just doubled down on his shocking revelations about the true spirit of Christianity and how we need to view one another. Speaking to the massive crowd, the Pope preached that Christians must pray for the ability to look at others with the same boundless mercy and caring that Jesus looks at every single one of us. Not mincing words, he plainly stated that no one is perfect. We all sin and make mistakes. If the Lord judged solely on our weaknesses, nobody could be saved. Expounding on that, he referenced the Gospel of John, showing how God did not send his Son to condemn the world, so it might be saved through him. In that light, we must see each other with compassion and understanding, just as Jesus sees us. He said something worth thinking about. When Jesus met people in the Gospels, he saw their authentic selves, the good, the bad, and the ugly. As he put it, there were no secrets before him. He could read their hearts. But here's the main point. Jesus wasn't looking to shame or cast harsh judgment. The Pope said Jesus saw the whole person, not to point fingers, but to embrace our lives, free us from sin, and save us. Pope Francis stressed that Jesus has no interest in putting us on trial or condemning us. Instead, he wants none of us to be lost. The Pope then described the Lord's view of us as the gentle glimmer of a lamp that allows us to see the good in ourselves, while still recognizing our flaws and mistakes so we can grow with his grace. But right after Pope Francis, he got real. He admitted how often we failed to treat each other with that same compassionate, merciful lens. In his words, we frequently condemn others, speaking badly and gossiping against them. He then said that we ask the Lord to give us this merciful gaze, to look at others as he looks at us. For Pope Francis, being a Christian means more than just attending church. It's about living out the values of the gospel in our daily lives, showing kindness and solidarity with those in need through charity, service, and empathy. According to him, faith demands rolling our sleeves to challenge injustice and encourage human dignity. Always remember that the gospel's power is not in philosophical ideals, but in unleashing it as a life-changing force for personal and social transformation. What do you think about Pope Francis's thoughts on Jesus' death? Do you think he is right? And which of his other opinions on specific topics which we revealed shocked you the most?